Morning, welcome to another video. I'm in Sheffield here to tell a story going back many generations, back to the early 1700s with this one. I've got Calvin with me, I'll introduce in a few moments, but this is the story of Sheffield's very early coal railways, coal tramroads, whatever you want to call them. We've got three to look at. So we've got two very early ones and then one that we can really get our teeth into.
We go back to the very beginning of modern railway history, the 1830s, and that's the newest of the three, because the other two are 18th century wooden wagonways in effect. But all the three of them in different ways have Sheffield first. They are the first of their kind in Sheffield, each of the three, and different generations.
And is this one of the world's oldest known examples of a railway? And this is Calvin. I'm privileged enough to be joined by you today. You were the lowdown on this. I'm just going to point the camera at you and let you go today. So just what's your kind of connection to this then? What's you got a lot going on in Sheffield history, haven't you?
Yeah, I mean, I tour guide and give talks and write about the Sheffield history online and for various organisations, all ages, and there are loads of Sheffield stories that fascinate me, and I came across this one about 10 years ago, and I like railway stuff. I love Sheffield history, and I love the fact that Sheffield history is often quite hidden, and I call my work hidden or hidden in open sight, and I think that sometimes sums it up, that there's enough already to see, but there's sometimes you just scratch the surface of Sheffield and it turns out that it's even more interesting than you thought.
So where can people find out about you or what you do?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook and Twitter. What Twitter was. Hidden Sheffield Walks is the easy way to find me on social media, but I've also got a Substack, Hidden in Open Sight. I think Hidden Open Sight describes better than hidden, because nothing I show is really hidden. It's only hidden because you haven't seen it or you haven't noticed.
So we start the story with the earlier two lines, the early two iterations of this old coal road, coal tramway, coal railway. And this is Norfolk Park, isn't it? And this is the kind of starting point for our story today. Yeah,
Norfolk Park. So it's the Duke of Norfolk land, the whole of the surrounding area, and this was just full of pits, full of very small collieries, all the way across Manor and Norfolk Park where we are now. They all took their coal down to the coal yard, the town coal yard, down at near Park Square roundabout. And there are a succession of different ways of transporting that coal, and some of Sheffield's very earliest, what we now see as railways history, is associated with those pits and with those deliveries of coal to the yard. We have what is thought and the earliest known use of the wagonways outside of Tyne and Wear, outside of Tyneside.
Yeah, that's at the northeast.
Yeah, there's definitely that. That's the beginning of the story. There is one story basically there was a woman was killed on the line in 1733, which is in the record. So we have some detail for that, which I'll say. But that's pretty much all we know about it. And what we do know, we only know because it's in the accounts. It's in the ledgers.
I don't think have we talked about dates for this. What's this? The first tramway was
1722, 23.
23.
Yeah. So it starts appearing on the records are pretty sketchy, but yes, we certainly by the end of the 1720s, it's thought. Definite referrals are by 1729, but I think they refer back over a few years. So I think people have estimated it's 1722, 23.
So if you live in Sheffield, Norfolk Park, public park, wooded area, that's where we're in at the moment. It's not always been like this, is it? Several collieries on this land.
And quarries, the park dates from the 1840s, and there was quarrying on the site, and just outside the park were small mines as well, coal mines, which is where our story is. So
when we're talking about these early iterations of this, I don't know what the right phrase is, gang roads, coal roads, tram roads?
Well, it keeps changing on the maps, and interestingly, a bit frustratingly sometimes, there isn't a natural progression. It doesn't change to something and then stay that thing. Yeah. It's I've seen it described as a railway in the 1820s, 1830s, but on the survey map, which is when things become official, and a lot of
Yeah.
terminology on the survey is the official terminology, it's back to being a tram road again.
Tram
So
road.
in 1830s it's a railway, but in 1855 it's a tram road again.
Yeah.
And so, which is interesting because we are then talking about a railway in terms
Yeah.
of it had actual rails. Wooden wagonway, I think, seems to be the term.
Yeah.
I'm happy to use railway when we're talking about iron rails later.
Later. You just touched on that then. Wooden rails. We're talking. I mean, obviously, we've done tramways before. We're no stranger to to the early iteration of rails, wooden rails, and horse-drawn, obviously, because this is before any invention of any locomotives.
Yeah, so horse-drawn rails made of beech or oak. Amazing, really. There's been recent archaeological discoveries in other parts of the country of intact wooden railways that have been dug up.
Right.
One at Wall's End in the northeast, and they pretty much look as you'd expect.
Yeah.
They look like a railway, but they're made of wood. And incredibly, they've been dug up in good condition. But we're talking the 1722, approximately around there, that the first of these lines near here comes to Sheffield, and it runs from the pit near Norfolk Park down to the coal yard in the edge of town. And this is, interestingly, this is the first time that this leaves the northeast of England. This had been used in the northeast of England for over a century at that time. One of the questions is, I suppose, why here? The other is, why not everywhere else?
Yeah.
Why did it clearly worked? It was cheaper. You could move larger amounts of coal at one time. Why did it not move beyond the northeast of England?
Yeah.
But when it did, it was the Duke of Norfolk estate here that invested quite a bit in it and sent people to Newcastle to watch the lines work, and he built one here.
Did the Duke of Norfolk have any links to the northeast then, that we know of? He's not like originating from there or from a family or anything like that.
Certainly the landed gentry families would have known each other and talked to each other. Extensive cousin and the like. So, not unlikely that he did. What must have been incredibly interesting, because you think this is 300 years ago, and this must have looked like the most modern and new of innovations. Suddenly there was a wooden line with horse and car on it between. Yeah. And we've come up the hill, even just a mile or so. It's quite a steep slope.
But this is before the time of inclines as well. That must have been quite a slow. It's the empties being brought back up. How did they control the wagons going down? Rudimentary brakes, I assume?
I don't know. We know very, very little about the first of the lines we're looking at today. It is difficult to picture, isn't it? No, I don't know. It's an interesting question, because that's where you're going down with the coal as well. Yeah. That's your full load that going down the hill.
Some weight, that. Yeah. So this is the top end of Norfolk Park that we're at now.
This is pretty much where those early lines were coming to collect the coal. Yeah.
Unimaginable to think that this area these days, just relatively inner city, suburban will be littered with collieries and
just 6 or 7 within sight of where we'd be if we were stood here then, each individually named, owned by a different person, and all linked together by the tramroad, by the wagonway, and which from the first one, from the one back in the 1720s, this is where it got its coal. This is where that coal yard down at Park Square got its coal from. The early lines, so in the 1720s, 1730s, all we know about the line, we don't have detail or a description of it. We just have the things that are in the records, because this is all about the Duke of Norfolk and his estates. And he didn't give much away, the Duke of Norfolk. If there was money being spent, it was in the records, it was in the ledgers. And the expenses for the line appear in his accounts in the 1720s, and even his members of staff's fact-finding missions to Newcastle. So the different things that appear in his records. So in 1729, we know he sends someone to Newcastle to liaise with the place where he got the idea from, where he gets the wagonway from. Yeah. But in 1733, there's a single line in the Duke of Norfolk's accounts, and it just says, "For the woman that was killed by the wagonway." A woman is killed on the line. We don't know anything about this. And the only detail we have from that is the year that it was a woman. It says the woman that was killed by the wagonway, and the amount of compensation is 10 shillings and sixpence. And there's no explanation. It's just a line of expense. People wouldn't have seen anything like this. This is, you wouldn't even have anything to compare it to. You've
Yeah.
got this, looks like a horse and cart, I guess, being dragged along a set of rails.
Yeah, completely
And
alien. So with this first and second lines that we've talked about, they were different routes. Why did they do the second? They didn't overlap in terms of dates, and the second line arrived.
The second line is completed in November 1774.
74,
So we have a lot more, in contrast to the first one, we have, in comparison, we have very thorough records. We have the expenditure, we have the plan, we have it on the maps. We know a lot more about that line, which appears to be basically a direct replacement. It's not referred to as such, but the first line's thought to have closed around 1760.
Yeah.
So, and we do know the second one is opened in 1774. Not on exactly the same route, but going
Similar.
to the same place, going to the same Park
Yeah.
Square coal yard, and coming back to almost the same pits where we are now. Not referred to as a replacement, but I sort of think of it as the second generation.
Next generation,
of that.
yeah, modernised. The second iteration, there was a little bit of controversy around it, wasn't there?
Yeah, this was at a period where the Sheffield mob, as they call them, liked a good riot on occasions. And the opening of the tramroad in November 1774, there was quite a serious riot, which a lot of damage was done and a lot of people hurt, because it was newfangled. There was a fear of new things. There was a combination of two factors. There was the horse and cart men were put out of work by the tram, but also people feared, rightly in some cases, that coal would become more expensive. And there were riots. So as soon as the line opened at the end of November 1774, there were riots. The track was ripped up. The stage, the terminus down at the coal yard, was badly damaged. At that time, the sheaf was not culverted, so the river ran just past the end of the canal. And so where the canal is now, the canal wasn't there at the time. So the trucks were thrown into the sheaf from what's now the canal basin. And there was a notable riot, and it was reported in the national press because there was an eyewitness. There is a letter to the national press at the end of November 1774, which refers to events of a few days earlier. So we have an almost exact date for the opening. It would have been sometime the 20-something of November 1774. It's that leads to the next part of the story, because the line is rebuilt.
And it's not rebuilt in the same way, is it?
This is the question. Many Sheffield histories and many railway histories state as fact, and this is what greatly intrigued me 8 or 10 years ago, is coming across references to the world's first railway. Literally, the world's first railway. And I'm thinking, well, that's pretty big. That's a claim. So we're looking at it, and there are serious pieces of work that say that as a result of the riot, they rebuilt the wooden line in cast iron to prevent it being torn up again so easily by rioters.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is interesting because this is around a decade before the first cast iron rails that we know of. So if this is true, this would make where we are now the home of the world's very first modern railway.
That's quite a bold.
Which is, I know, and you just read it, and because we know relatively little, this tends to either be dismissed or stated as fact, because there isn't really much to back it up with. So people either say it's true or they say it's a claim.
Yeah.
Because we don't know an awful lot. But there are serious people and serious histories that say so. And there are reasons why. We know from the records and the expenditure that it was still being built of wood. It was still being made of wood for some years afterwards. This has a part in early railway history, because it's all development, everything develops on the experience of what's gone before. Yeah. And it may well be that some innovations that happened around here did play their part in what we now know as railways. It wasn't rebuilt in cast iron to prevent the riot.
No.
Unfortunately, it's a good story, but it's unfortunate. History books sometimes say that people were mistaken in rioting, thinking that coal would go up in price. The cold fact is that coal came down in price. The reality for some people is that it did go up in price because you had to buy a lot at once.
So our very two early lines, one place that we can pinpoint them together as a common place that they ran close by to is just here, just on Stafford Lane. Now, this is quite a little bit of history. This is fantastic that this is still remaining, Calvin. So,
yeah, this is at least 1750, 1760 and possibly older. And this is the Duke of Norfolk's gin stables. This is where his working horses, where they lived. several mines close to this spot, and it's at the centre of our story.
What is this? So this is the route, one of the routes passed through, right through this little...
So that's the gin stables there. That, I think, is the bottom building of the gin stables just in front of us, unless one has gone. If there were other buildings, it'll be nearer the road, but if that's the last one, if that's the original, that puts the line about here, because it went right up to the back of that. So it's tempting that this is an undeveloped place where it might be underneath.
One of the very few places you can stand and see.
Yeah, and possibly have a look as well.
So John Curr, then, it's quite a claim to fame then, inventor of the world's first railway.
Not only does where we're standing now get credited as the home of the world's first cast iron railway, but a man himself, John Curr, who was for many years the overseer, the colliery manager of the Norfolk estate pits. He comes to Sheffield in around 1774, when he would have been about 18. He was born in 1756. Well, we do know he does manage the Norfolk's interests for over 20 years. He by about 1777 until 1800.
Yeah.
He is in charge of the estates, the estate collieries, and he's often credited without explanation that he is the inventor of the railway. Again, we've been through, this is quite a claim, but the reasons are, so this is somebody who was a multiple inventor. Kerr went on to patent and invent many things. He was an engineer, and he also had a background in mining. His father had the equivalent job in the northeast of England. He's from the northeast. So firstly, he's from the Newcastle area.
Yeah.
So he's from an area of mining area and an area that we know had early wagonways. So we know he's steeped in the colliery trade. We know he would have seen wagonways ever since he was old enough to know. He would have been at his father's knee. He would have been learning stuff from a very young age. So it's not impossible that he comes here to Sheffield at aged 18 with a lot of knowledge. He is a prodigy, he is an inventor. Yeah. There are a lot of factors that don't dismiss the claims about John Curr. He would have had sufficient knowledge, he would have had sufficient background, and he would have had the power, the free rein as the manager of the Norfolk's collieries. But there's a big but in this. Firstly, the estate records show that wooden rails were still being purchased into the 1780s, around 10 years after the claim is made. So we know that cast iron rails didn't become the norm. Yeah. At the time, some claim them to be. But the big argument about Kerr is that he wasn't shy about his own achievements. He wrote a book in 1797, which is very technical. I have a modern reprint of it. And it's full of graphs and graphics of things he's built and how he's gone about them. He was an engineer first and foremost, and he lists his inventions. Now, in his book, he refers to his rail innovations of 20 years previously, or 21 years previously. Yeah. So a lot of historians have taken that as meaning around 1776, that means the cast iron railways. But in a book where he spells out in detail his achievements and his inventions, to leave such an oblique reference to what would have been by then recognisable world first does seem unlikely, and certainly out of character, because the Duke of Norfolk sacks Kerr in 1800, and John Curr writes a very detailed and long letter, which is in the archives, basically replying to the Duke, telling him that with the greatest of respect, he's brilliant, and here's all the things he invented for him. So he writes this response to his dismissal, reminding the Duke of Norfolk how many things he's invented, what he's done for him.
And was the railway on that list of things?
No,
exactly. It wasn't.
It is referred to in the most vague sense in his book. In his book, he would have referred to it much clearer. In his objection to his sacking, he would have. There's no way he
just nonchalantly.
There's no way he doesn't mention. I think, for what it's worth, I think that neither the claim nor the debunking are completely true. I think it's quite likely that he experimented as an inventor. I suspect it's quite possible that there was a few yards of line that may just have been the world's first cast iron railway. but the whole thing wasn't the first cast iron railway. And he didn't consider it important enough in either 1797 or 1800 to mention. And this is at a time when other places have announced themselves as the inventor of the cast iron railway.
There's a lot going off there. You want a piece of that pie.
In the Industrial Revolution,
Yeah.
and by the 1800, cast iron rails are a thing. And he at no time says, and he lives until the 1820s as well, and he at no time makes that claim. We're not stood where the very first railway in the world ran.
No. I think as Sheffield, people living in Sheffield would have known this fact.
I think even Sheffield, which it does quite often hide its light under a bushel in history terms, I think even we'd be claiming this one.
And here we are, look, this is Park Square, roundabout, just stood on top of now, so all over here. Do you mean just look at the old maps, the amount of stuff going on here, and this is overlooking all the old coal yard and such, isn't it, down here? And this is where our tramways were heading, ultimately. And that brings us nicely on to the next episode. So thanks for watching this one. In the next one, we're going to be getting our teeth into the 1830s generation of this coal railway, starting from Manor Park, isn't it?
Yeah, from the Manor pits, yes, the two pits on that side, and into the modern railway era, or the start of the modern railway era.
Yeah, the start. Well, that's another. We'll leave that one hanging there. So thanks for watching, and thanks to Calvin, and we'll see you soon.